Pontiac was once the heartbeat of America, a brand that gave us the GTO, Firebird, Trans Am, and Bonneville. Cars with attitude, cars that matter. But just a few decades later, the badge disappeared. Not because we stopped loving it, but because General Motors killed it. Today, we are diving deep into how GM destroyed one of its most legendary brands, and why Pontiac never got the revival it deserved. Welcome to the Racing Helmet. This is the rise and fall of Pontiac. Pontiac was born in 1926, named after the famous Native American leader. At first, it was just another mid-level GM brand, but by the late 1950s, it was transforming into something more exciting. In the early 1960s, Pontiac engineers led by performance legend John DeLorean broke GM's internal rules to create the 1964 GTO. What they did was simple but brilliant. Take a mid-sized Tempest, drop in a 389 cubic inch V8, and give it a mean look. They created the muscle car, and America fell in love. Then came the Firebird in 1967, Pontiac's answer to the Ford Mustang. It quickly evolved into the Trans Am, and by the late 70s, thanks to Smokey and the Bandit, it became a pop culture. But Pontiac wasn't just muscle. It gave us big, powerful cruisers like the Bonneville, slick GTs like the Grand Prix, and unique elements like the Pontiac 2+2, a NASCAR-inspired fastback. By the early 70s, Pontiac was the third best-selling car brand in America, but dark crowds were forming. The 1973 oil crisis hit performance cars hard, and emissions regulations started choking the life out of big V8s. Pontiac's raw muscle was being nurtured, but worse, the brand started losing its identity. The Fiero, launched in 1984, was a unique mid-engine sports car, way ahead of its time. But GM cut corners. Early models caught fire, and instead of fixing it, they killed it just as it was getting good. Cars like the Sunfire, Grand Am, and Bonneville SSEI tried to keep the excitement alive, but they suffered from cheap interiors, cladding overload, and lack of focus. What was Pontiac now? Sporty, luxury, budget? Even worse, GM had too many brands competing against each other. Pontiac, Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Saturn, Buick, all sharing platforms and fighting over the same buyers. They were bright spots like the Grand Prix GTP with its supercharged V6, or the Quick Aztec, a car hated in its time but now ironically loved for being so weird. Still, Pontiac was drifting, and GM wasn't steering. By the early 2000s, Pontiac was on a life support. But then, something interesting happened. GM looked at its Australian division, Holden, for inspiration. The result? The 2004 Pontiac GTO, a rebadged Holden Monaro. It had a 5.7-liter LS1 V8 making 350 horsepower, later bumped to 400. It was fast, well built, and fun to drive. But the styling was way too bland. Americans expected more muscle from a GTO. It didn't sell. Then came the Pontiac Solstice in 2006, a compact roadster with beautiful curves and a surprisingly solid chassis. The turbocharged GXT version made 260 horsepower and handled well, but it lacked refinement, and trunk was practically non-existent. And then, in 2008, Pontiac gave us its final masterpiece, the Pontiac G8. Built in Australia as Holden Commodore, The G8 GT came with a 361 horsepower V8 with rear-wheel drive. The G8 GXP, a legit 4-door Corvette with a 415 horsepower LS3 and a manual transmission. It was everything Pontiac should have been. But GM launched it during the worst time possible. In 2008, the global economy crashed. GM was drowning in debt and mismanagement. The company was bloated, inefficient, and bleeding money. To survive, GM took a massive government bailout. But there was a catch. It had to shrink. Brands had to go, and Pontiac, along with Saturn, Hummer, and Saab, was cut. On April 27, 2009, GM officially announced it would kill Pontiac by the end of 2010. The G8 was gone. The Solstice was gone. Even the planned G8 sports truck, a modern El Camino, was cancelled before it hit the streets. Pontiac was finally building the kind of cars enthusiasts wanted. But it was too late. So, let's be honest. Pontiac didn't die because of financial crisis. That was just the final blow. Pontiac died because GM killed it slowly over decades. It died because it lost its unique identity. It was buried under GM's badge engineering. Its best ideas were underfunded or ignored. And when it finally got things right, the timing could have been worse. Pontiac had the potential to be GM's performance halo brand, but instead, GM let it fade and then pulled the plug. So, what do you think? Could GM ever bring Pontiac back? And which model was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe to the Racing Helmet, and tap the bell so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching.